The storm rolled down from the mountains with a fury that shook the valley. Winds howled against the rooftops, flinging snow sideways, burying roads, and silencing the world in white. Margaret, 80 years old and stubborn as oak, sat in her tiny cottage knitting by the fire. She had lived alone since her husband passed away a decade ago, and while winters could be cruel in this part of the country, she had grown used to their rhythm, stockpiling firewood, canning vegetables, and preparing for nights when the snow cut her off from town. But nothing prepared her for the thunder that rattled her windows that night. It wasn't the storm, it was engines. Low, powerful, and angry, like beasts snarling against the storm. Margaret frowned, put down her knitting, and shuffled to the door. Peering through the frosted glass, her eyes widened. Out of the blizzard emerged figures, 15 men in heavy leather jackets, their shoulders dusted with snow, their faces hidden under scarves and helmets. Their bikes, monstrous machines, were half buried in drifts. Patches across their backs glared through the snow, Hell's Angels. Her heart skipped. She had heard stories of them, outlaws, troublemakers, feared wherever they rode. And now they were at her door. A knock like thunder rattled her old wooden frame. Margaret's hand trembled on the knob, but her instincts won over fear. She cracked the door open. The leader stepped forward, tall, broad, tattoos creeping up his neck like vines, his eyes tired but steady. He pulled down his scarf and spoke, his voice low and respectful. "Ma'am, we don't mean harm. The storm caught us. Roads are closed. We've got nowhere to go. Could we just stay in your barn till morning?" For a long moment, Margaret studied them. Any other woman would have slammed the door, bolted it, prayed for them to go away. But she saw something else, their chapped lips, red hands, the snow clinging to their eyelashes. They weren't predators tonight. They were men, cold and desperate. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Barn, you'll freeze to death out there." She swung the door wider, shocking them. "Get in here, boys. But wipe your boots. I just mopped." The gang stared at her as if she'd lost her mind. Then, slowly, awkwardly, one by one, they filed inside. The heat from the fireplace washed over them, and they stood there like statues, dripping snow on her rug. "Well, don't just stand there gawking," Margaret scolded, bustling past them. "Hang your coats, sit by the fire. You'll catch pneumonia if you don't." The men exchanged glances, unsure whether to laugh or obey. But there was something about the tiny woman's commanding presence that left no room for argument. Boots came off, coats were hung, and 15 hardened bikers found themselves crammed into a little cottage, the scent of burning pine filling their lungs. Margaret, already pulling down her soup pot, muttered, "15 wolves at my door. What would Harold say?" Then, louder, "Who wants stew?" For the first time that night, the bikers smiled. The small cottage had never felt so full. Leather jackets steamed by the fire, helmets lined the hallway, and the smell of Margaret's stew filled the air. The bikers, unsure how to behave, sat stiffly on her mismatched chairs and couch, their knees knocking against her coffee table. The largest of them, a mountain of a man with a scar across his cheek, looked ridiculous sipping cocoa from a dainty floral teacup. Margaret didn't seem to notice, or maybe she did and simply didn't care. "Eat, eat," she fussed, ladling generous portions of stew into chipped bowls. "You boys look half-starved. When's the last time any of you had a proper meal?" The leader cleared his throat, a little embarrassed. "Been on the road for weeks. Ma'am, gas stations, diners, whatever's open." "Well, no wonder you're all skin and bones," Margaret clucked. "Pass the bread, Reggie." The biker she addressed, who hadn't told her his name, blinked in surprise. She had simply assigned him one. Still, he passed the bread like an obedient schoolboy. Soon, the tension melted into warmth. Laughter rose over the crackling fire as bowls were refilled, mugs of cocoa replenished. They told her stories, of deserts and highways, of sunsets seen from the saddle, of run-ins with police and rival gangs. Normally, these stories were laced with bravado, but here, in Margaret's cozy living room, they softened. They spoke not as outlaws, but as men who had chosen a road that kept them together because the world had no place for them apart. Margaret listened without judgment. Occasionally she nodded, sometimes she scolded. When one of them cursed, she swatted the air with her wooden spoon. Language. There are ladies present. The men chuckled like chastised children. After dinner, the bikers insisted on helping with chores. Margaret tried to wave them off, but 15 sets of hands could not sit idle. They chopped firewood under the porch light, shoveled her walkway clear of snow, even washed her dishes, though she barked at them for stacking her china the wrong way. For the first time in years, her house bustled with life, not loneliness. Later, Margaret spread quilts and blankets across the floor. "Well, it's not the Ritz," she said, "but it'll keep you warm." The scarred man smirked. "Ma'am, this is better than most places we've slept." The men settled down, some snoring within minutes, others whispering softly in the dim light. Margaret, sitting in her rocker, watched them with tired eyes. They looked less like wolves now, and more like a pack of weary strays finally given shelter. By dawn, the storm had lifted. Sunlight spilled across snowbanks that glistened like diamonds. The bikers prepared their machines, the roar of engines once again filling the valley. Before leaving, the leader approached Margaret. His voice, usually gravel and steel, was softer now. "You didn't know us, ma'am. You had every reason to shut the door. But you didn't. You gave us warmth, food, and respect." He paused, almost choking on the word. "We won't forget." Margaret smiled and patted his hand, her wrinkled eyes twinkling. "The world could use more trust, son. Now get on your way before the snow comes back." And with that, 15 bikes thundered off down the mountain road, leaving behind only tracks in the snow and the faint smell of leather and gasoline. The next morning, Margaret was back in her routine, boiling water for tea, humming a hymn her mother once sang. The storm had passed, leaving a world of glittering white silence. She expected nothing more than a quiet day of shoveling snow from her porch and mending a quilt. But then, the ground began to tremble. At first, she thought it was distant thunder. Her teacup rattled against its saucer, and the low rumble grew louder, steadier. Margaret set her cup down and went to the window. What she saw made her breath catch. Down the narrow mountain road came not 15, but what looked like an army. Motorcycles, dozens upon dozens, snaked their way up toward her house. Chrome gleamed in the sun, leather jackets flapped in the cold wind, and the roar of engines rose like a battle cry. She counted as best she could, her eyes wide. 50, 70, nearly 100 riders. By the time they reached her cottage, the entire street was swallowed by the thunder of engines. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, some clutching telephones, ready to call the sheriff. But Margaret simply folded her arms and waited, a spark of amusement tugging at her lips. The first man off his bike was the same leader from the night before. His boots crunched against the snow as he strode up her porch, holding something almost comical in his rough, tattooed hands, a bouquet of bright, fresh flowers. He removed his sunglasses, his eyes steady but softer than before. "Ma'am," he said, clearing his throat as though unused to such words, "we told our brothers what you did. How you opened your door when no one else would. How you treated us like men, not monsters." He held the flowers out awkwardly, like a schoolboy at prom. "We came back to make sure you're never forgotten. Your family now." Behind him, engines cut off one by one. Riders dismounted, pulling crates from their bikes, boxes of groceries, sacks of firewood, even bundles of tools. Some carried ladders, already eyeing her sagging roof. Others shoveled her driveway without being asked. The same neighbors who had whispered fearfully about the gang, now stared in disbelief as the most feared motorcycle club in the country worked together like a small army of handymen and delivery boys, all for one old woman who had dared to show them kindness. Margaret stood there, shaking her head in disbelief. All this fuss for a pot of stew and some blankets. The leader's lips tugged into a rare grin. "No, ma'am, all this fuss for you." By afternoon, her cupboards overflowed, her firewood pile was stacked taller than she was, and her house looked better than it had in decades. The riders didn't leave until they were certain she was safe, warm, and cared for. As the last bike roared away into the horizon, Margaret sat on her porch in her rocker, the flowers resting in her lap. She chuckled softly to herself. "Well, Harold," she whispered to the empty air where her husband once sat, "looks like I've gone and adopted 100 grandsons." From that day on, Margaret was no longer just the old widow at the edge of town. She was Grandma Margaret, protected, cherished, and forever part of the brotherhood she had welcomed in from the cold.